Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, I'm going to be running through some tips and tricks to climb up in the solo queue ladder, go over some of the strategies that I personally utilized in my journey to the rank 1 position for balanced druids, so that you can take those strategies, not make the same mistakes as me, and climb twice as fast. It sounds pretty good, I think, right there, right? I don't think you could say no to that question. So the first thing with solo queue is that you want to be using your defensive cooldowns very early. Usually enemies are just going to pop all their damage buttons. So I solar beam the healer right away, get crowd control immediately, and dump all of my damage. I use Thorns, Nature's Vigil. I try and get everything going as fast as possible, basically. Just get the engine rolling, get his instant crowd control on the healer, get all your damage out as soon as possible, start pressuring your enemies, and maximize your damage. That's going to be the most important component to climb. Don't be so focused on getting the perfect CC, getting the perfect setup. You really just want to focus on throughput, and often you'll be able to win rounds just by min-maxing your damage and shoving out as much as possible, and the other team not expecting it and falling behind, or trading inefficiently. Also, because dampening stacks up really fast, you want to be getting your cooldowns out as much as possible so that you can see them a second time, especially if you're playing with 3-minute cooldowns or 2-minute cooldowns. It's really important to get that first set out as soon as possible. And then defensively, to be aware that the enemies are probably going to be doing that. So you're going to need to be not so frugal and kind of chucking out your cooldowns as responsibly as you can. So our shaman here dropping Spirit Link Totem very early. Now in this matchup, they've got Demon Hunter and Death Knight. I want to CC the healer as soon as possible with Root Solar Beam, and I want to try and get dots up so that I can get aggressive onto the DPS. Unfortunately, they're kind of split up in this position, so it's hard to land a double orbital strike as a balanced druid. You really want to hit as many targets as you can. You can see me aiming it right now. I've got Nature's Vigil up almost immediately in Heart of the Wild. You can see if I didn't, maybe that spike of damage would have killed my druid here. We're going to activate Thorns in the target that's getting attacked to even bolster our damage even higher, and just dump out as much damage as possible. With balanced druid, you want to use Starfall to proc your free star surges with the talent build that I have in my guide, which I'll have linked at the end of this video, as that is the best way I've been able to utilize my damage output. I'm using Wild Mushrooms here to make sure that I've got 3 dots on the target to try and make sure that I'm doing as much damage as possible. I can see the Evoker in a position where I'd like to Cyclone them, maybe push them away. Still kind of focused on just doing damage at this point and just playing around instant CC. Don't kind of drag yourself into weird positions chasing healers, trying to get CC that's going to be too tough to get. So if your class has instant CC, try and utilize that first. Here the Evoker's in a good position. I get a Cyclone. This forces every defensive cooldown from the Death Knight and the Demon Hunter. We still have pressure on the Demon Hunter. We're still focused on min-maxing damage, the most important component. If you don't know how to do damage, you're not topping the scoreboards, go back into some battlegrounds, make sure that you know you're doing your rotation right, check your talents, make sure you're playing the right talents. It's really important that your damage is maximized in this format, because damage is so important when healing is reduced by such a significant margin as it is in solo queue. Here we've activated Thorns on our druid that's getting focused to redirect some more damage. We're going to activate Eclipse, dump out more Starfalls, and then jump over towards the Evoker healer. Here, unfortunately, I bash into their Shroud. You don't want to be doing that into Evoker healers. Make sure you're aware of that. Otherwise, they're going to immune your important crowd control. Use spammable crowd control if you have it. If you don't, you may just have to chuck crowd controls into it. You can optimally, you would purge it off. That would be the best way to do it. We almost killed the Demon Hunter here, literally 10% health remaining. If I had that bash for the Evoker with no trinket on the Evoker, probably would have won this round. So really important to pay attention to CC immunities. Don't waste your most valuable CCs into those effects. Here we're going after the Death Knight. We get anti-magic zone or anti-magic shield, but here now you can see the Death Knight has their cooldowns back up way faster because they just shoved it out as soon as possible with this Abominations limb rolling around. So I'm desperately trying to bash DPS, root DPS, and heal and support to keep ourselves alive during that second cooldown window. But the second cooldown window is going to be incredibly scary. You need to be really aware of these 2-minute timers, 3-minute timers, so that when they come up the second time, you've got something prepared for them. So usually I like lining up cooldown with cooldown. If the enemies use a 3-minute cooldown, I'll use a 3-minute cooldown, and try to avoid using too many of a 3-minute cooldown, because then the next time they come up, you might not be able to get it. But they do line up really effectively for the most part. So we weren't able to win that round. We're really close. You can see even just little minor mistakes like that can cost you a round. So paying attention to the Shrouds on the Evoker DPS, not wasting your most valuable instant CCs into those. We're going to start the next round. Stampede, Roar, and Stealth run immediately over at the enemy healer because I want to just immediately get crowd control. If I can get a trinket from the healer, it's great. Fortunately, I see the Death Knight attacking the Evoker, so my strategy to kind of root beam the Evoker is kind of out the window if we utilize that. But if we can stack them all up, I'm going to solar beam the team together, triple orbital strike, and now just focus on damage. Emerald Communion, I don't think we have anything to stop it. We actually get a Hex, which surprisingly doesn't look like it does stop it. I thought that Polymorph DR did. Either way, we're focused back on dealing damage. They're attacking us, so we're going to use Thorns on ourselves. Nature's Vigil right away. Wild Mushroom on 3 targets is going to be really powerful for Astral Power generation. We're going to use Heart of the Wild very early as well, and we still die. So you can see, even clutching out every defensive cooldown as soon as possible, you might get killed. This is why we saw our Shaman toss the Spirit Link down. Maybe if we had buffered it a bit or sooner, if we had Heart of the Wild up a bit faster, that would have buffed our Frenzy Regen auto proc. That's why I say, just like, if you're the target getting attacked, get your defensive cooldown up as soon as possible. I almost think it's a good rule of thumb that in solo queue, that whoever's the target uses their defensive cooldowns first and uses them pretty soon off the gate starting, especially at lower rating. The higher you get, some players might be like, hey, I know you're going to do that, so I'm going to hold off, but sometimes they get overwhelmed while they're waiting to hold off, so it doesn't always work out like that. But you really want to try and buffer the damage as much as possible as a DPS player by activating your defensives as soon as you realize that you're a primary focus target for your opponents to mitigate it. We can see immediately the Death Knight has ripped out every defensive. We're going to Solar Beam the Shaman, try and root a bunch of the Death Knight pets, and then reposition away from the cleave and avoid some damage here as much as possible. We've used Thorns on our other Druid ally here, anticipating them to be the swap target as I start to make my escape. And you can see here I got hunted by the Demon Hunter. I should have used Heart of the Wild here. I think I did get it up for the Frenzied Regen, so that auto Frenzy Regen is going to heal more. I'm also going to get 2 charges of it. Just really important right off the rip to just not hold anything back if you're the target getting attacked, because you will get immediately destroyed if you're too conservative with your options. Here we're trying to root everything, pick up some bombs off the ground from our Starfall and run them into the Demon Hunter and the Death Knight. And we're basically just going to be running around circles using Wild Mushroom to keep up our triple stack as much as possible. And I'm trying to drag them on top of the Shaman because Feral Druids do a ton of AoE cleave. And I think that with now the Shaman buffs, the best way to deal with Shaman is kind of attacking them and going after them. And as a result of stacking them on the healer, I was able to get kind of like a triple pressure, get a Spirit Link Totem. Healers really hate having melee cleaves dragged on top of them. So if you're a caster DPS with decent mobility, doing what I'm doing, running them on top of the enemy healer to get the healer involved, they have to deal with off kicks, they have to deal with getting cleaved down, it becomes really more difficult to survive. A lot of classes focus on this AoE damage. Feral Druid is one of those. So I'm just going after the Shaman, running on top of them, keeping pressure up. My Feral Druid takes out the Demon Hunter, and I really like doing this when I'm a caster and I'm being attacked. This is obviously going to be more difficult to do if you're limited on mobility, like a Shadow Priest, or in some cases even a Warlock, to be able to safely stand there. This really only works, I think, with Baby, Ellie Shaman, and Balanced Druid, because they can be a little bit more instant cast focused than the other casters. But generally, if you need to be aware what classes you're playing with. So Feral Druids AoE really hard, bringing them and stacking enemies for them is really good. Demo Locks is the same with their pet Bladestorm. Demon Hunters is the same, really good cleave. So dragging this team on top of my Demon Hunter will be a really good way to guarantee that our damage is maximized if we're not going to Solar Beam immediately. So I can see the Demon Hunter kind of pushing towards the Shaman, so I'm getting dots on the Shaman, anticipating them to be a target, waiting and kind of feeling out the match to see where my Demon Hunter is going before I choose to root beam in this instance. Got to snipe out the Grounding Totem. Here they've immediately popped cooldowns. We're going to Bark Skin, we're going to Nature's Vigil, we're going to Heart of the Wild. We're not going to hold anything back. This way our Frenzied Regen will be maximized. Root beam the Shaman in that Earthen Wall, drag the Feral and the Death Knight out, activate our Thorns, min-max our damage here during the Solar Beam effect, bash up the Feral Druid as my Demon Hunter is going after them to try and get some pressure out, jump out into the open. Now this is where I can make a decision. I could either run on top of the Shaman and get some cleave going on the Shaman, or continue to play in a neutral position. Honestly, if I was more alive and safe in this position, I probably should be running at the Shaman, stacking up for the Demon Hunter, because look what I'm doing. I'm dragging the Death Knight and the Druid on top of my healer. This is the problem of, as a ranged DPS, that will cost you games, is doing what I'm doing actually in this position, is you don't want to put these melee on top of your healer. We're going to snipe out the Grounding. We're going after the Shaman. We got a triple Orbital Strike. That is the highest value you can get with that ability. Just immediately 3 Stellar Flares. Starfalls are proccing instant free Star Surges, and we're getting tremendous amounts of pressure out, cleaving the whole team. We've got them all down below 50%, and I should have been bringing them on top of the Shaman way sooner from this position, because just look at this. Knock the Shaman off the side, out of line of sight of his teammates. Fortunately, this Feral Druid's got the awareness to realize that and didn't walk into his death. Moves back into the Shaman's line of sight. We're going to reposition, try and Solar Beam. Ends up breaking. This is the downside of trying to root beam with this strategy. If you are going to employ it, I wouldn't use crowd control that breaks to damage. like I did in that position. It's probably better to use root to survive, rooting the Death Knight pets when they all come out and start swarming you, as opposed to trying to use a solar beam if they're all stacked up like this. Here we're lightning lassoed. We pre-bear formed it. We've got frenzied regen, nature's vigil. You can see that I pretty much popped that on cooldown, just trying to maximize the healing output, the efficiency of the game, because it's really tough for healers to heal with this level of dampening. We're rooting up all the DPS. We're kind of desperate at this point. Our healer's kind of like in a non-recoverable position. We're regrowthing. We're trying to cyclone, doing whatever we can to buy time. But honestly, the best way to win this match would have been to not drag my teammates on top of my healer, but rather drag them on top of the enemy healer when it's a melee cleave situation. Obviously, if there's casters, it's going to be a bit different, but I think that this lobby is going to be a more common one. Melee DPS are just more populated specializations. I'd say more popular overall. You're probably going to see more lobbies like this. So understanding the situations and knowing how to deal with them is going to get you wins. Like already I'm seeing 2 rounds in this VOD review that if I had made a couple of shifts either in positioning or crowd control usage, I would have won. So I definitely recommend doing this with your own gameplay, is recording it and looking back at it. It's really easy to go like, oh my God, my teammates are bad. And I mean, I do that too. And not actually take into account some self-accountability, right? And what you could have done differently for the outcome of the match. You always want to be min-maxing everything that you can do because it's all you can control. Here we've got a death or demon hunter and a feral druid. So again, I could stack them up on the shaman. This would be a great idea. We death grip the shaman in, which is actually perfect. We blind the whole team. This can set me up well for an orbital strike. I don't know why I didn't send it. I think it's because I saw Earthen Wall Totem down. I wanted to wait and save my cooldowns for later, but you can see the dangers of doing that. We've got Heart of the Wild, Nature's Vigil up immediately. If you're the target, activate those defensives. Don't hold them back. This game, I did play more patient with my orbital strike because I saw the shaman dump Ascendance and everything. Shaman escapes and gets away. We can solar beam. Now, I should likely be thinking about dragging them on top of the shaman in this specific area. We grip the shaman. We drop zone. I got to go back into that. Try and be aware of these defensive cooldowns that classes have, like Death Knights and Priests, when they drop these area of effects and darkness from Demon Hunters on the ground, to try and utilize those and jump into them. It can be very difficult with no voice, so just being aware of the purple bubble, the yellow bubble, and then the purple puddle on the ground. Those are kind of like the main defensive mechanics of those classes visually. You can see their purple puddle down on the ground. We don't want to stand in that, so I'm going to be attacking the target that isn't in it, which is the shaman. Off to the side, dumping my Fury of Elune. Really important, actually, dump your Fury of Elune and your Astral Communion right away with your Incarn, and then use them 1 minute cooldown later. This is a little bit more specific to Moonkin tech, so that way you're getting them the most Astral Power generation. And you can see now that we got the Shaman in the fight, we've got them stacked up. They're starting to get cleaved around. They're all at 10% health. They're really struggling to heal through the damage. We're still continuing to proc Star Surges, working towards more Starfalls. We bash with the Demon Hunter and just kind of like accidentally knock them over like bowling pins for a strike right there with the Death Knight. And this is a shuffle where I probably could have won maybe 5 rounds. I got that one shot, which I did everything I could if my shaman got the link faster, but the other 2 rounds, if I'd saved that bash, got rid of the shroud, if I'd been in a better position to cleave the shaman, this is a round where I could have gone 6-0. And this is why it's really good to look at your gameplay, go back and try and assess what you could have done differently strategy wise. This is how I would play these cleave lobbies if I was a caster. If I was a warlock, I might pull enemies further away and drag them behind pillars rather than try and drag them on top of the shaman. That way the healer has to come in and heal, and then we can maybe do a swap. But it's a little bit different in those perspectives. The number one thing is to not run these melee attackers into your healer. That is the worst thing you can do. If you can't bring them into the enemy healer, do not bring them into your healer. You're going to regret that. Use defensive cooldowns really fast and frequently, especially if you're the target. You need to get them up basically as soon as possible, and then min-max your damage. If you do these things, you know, there's like a rule where 20% of the work gets like 80% of the results or something like that. Those are like the core foundation things that are going to get you the most amount of rating as quick as possible. The other 20% of flashy stuff, setting up CC and landing interrupts and stuff like that, is the other 20%. But if you really just want to get some of the more base rewards from this and have a good time, those will be kind of the fundamentals. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'll have my Boomkin guide linked here as well. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.